اوكي.
طيب السلام عليكم، مرحبا للجميع في الجلسة الثانية لهذا اليوم من ورشة الإنتاج المعرفي. في هذه الجلسة نستضيف البروفيسور إيلان بابيه حول محاضرة. بحكي من اجت خلفية الدعوة لإيلان. طبعا إيلان بابيه هو مؤرخ ومدير المركز الأوروبي للدراسات الفلسطينية في جامعة إكستر. وعنوان المحاضرة سيكون ذعر أخلاقي أم شجاعة أخلاقية، المثقفون الغربيون وإبادة غزة. بصراحة أنا سمعت مقابلة مع إيلان في الجزيرة كانت، وتحدث إيلان عن الإنتاج المثقفين الألمان حول غزة وعلاقتهم مع إسرائيل. واستوقفتني جملة في اللقاء اللي فيها الأستاذ إيلان يعترف يعني بالمكانة الفكرية والمعرفية للمثقفين الألمان، وحتى المكانة الأخلاقية. يعترف انه عندهم مكانه معرفيه وهم متمكنين وقاهرين ومهنيين، ولكن كل ذلك ينتفي عندما يتعاملون مع اسرائيل. ينتفي كل ذلك عندما يتعاملون مع اسرائيل. وهون اجت هاي فكره هذه المحاضره، انه ما هو وضع المثقفين الغربيون عموما في التعامل مع حرب الإبادة مع غزه، ما بين الذعر الأخلاقي بالذات فيما يتعلق بإسرائيل، موضوع معاداة السامية والمحرقة اليهودية، وهل هي شجاعة أخلاقية؟ يعني هل الأخلاق تحتاج إلى شجاعة؟ يعني هل أصبح التعبير عن الموقف الأخلاقي أيضا يحتاج إلى شجاعة في أوروبا، يعني في الغرب؟ يعني كنا نفهم ذلك مثلا في إطار نظام استبداد، ولكن في أوروبا في سياق ديمقراطي حرية التعبير أصبح التعبير في بعض الأحيان عن الموقف الأخلاقي هو شجاعة. وهون إحنا يعني دعونا البروفيسور إيلان المشرف الماجستير إلي أيام جامعة حيفا سابقا.
كان شاطر.
بصراحة كان محاضر صعب إيلان. علمني تعرضية ثقافية، مالتي كالتشراليزم، فاعطانا دوسيه كلها مقالات بالانجليزي، وكان المفروض نقرا بكل محاضره مقال في الانجليزي. فكثير استفدنا من هاي
انا متاسف.
لا هسه صعب تقدر تعطي الطلاب هاي الدوسيه بالمقالات الانجليزي، ما حدا بيقرا اليوم فصعب
للاسف.
فإيلان شكرا لك، فتفضل.
شكرا جزيلا. انقل الى اللغه الانجليزيه كما اتفقنا على هيك. انا متاسف على اللغه العربيه تبعي ضعيفه. So I'll move to English, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for moving me into this direction, which I didn't think of writing something more general apart from that interview. It was not the only interview. The background is important because a more important interview was the one I gave in Germany. I should maybe give some biographical note to explain why Germany is so crucial for me in a way. My parents were born in Germany, and they came to Palestine in the early 1930s. I was born in Haifa, but they were born in Germany. And I know German, I know the language. I'm not very fluent in the language, but I understand it very well. I can read a little bit, can write a little bit. But because of that family connection, and of course because of the very complicated relations between Germany, Zionism, Palestine, I take a very focused interest in Germany, and I visited quite a lot because I feel more secure than many German intellectuals to talk about Palestine nowadays. And in one of the very few interviews I did give to the German media, I talked from my heart and not so much from my head. And I said to some German colleagues who were there, whom I know very well. I read them, I listened to them. I have a lot of respect for what they do in their own fields of inquiry. But I said to them, it was a moment of anger, of frustration, maybe not anger, frustration, right? I said, you know, you sound like imbeciles. You know, I don't know if you know what imbecile is like. It's worse than being an idiot. An imbecile is درجة تحت الجاهل. Anyway, it came out. I didn't mean I didn't want to insult them, but this was a genuine reaction. I mean, I know you people. You're very articulate. You're very sophisticated. You're very knowledgeable. But when you talk about Israel and Palestine, you sound, in a more polite way, ignorant. In less polite way, imbeciles. I shouldn't have said the word imbecile. It's not nice. But it came out because I was so frustrated. And that was the background, the mukabala ma Al Jazeera. But you forced me, which is good, to look at it a bit more general. And I think it's important. So I would like to start by asking a question that I don't have a full answer for, but is a good kind of preface to this intervention to make sure that, although I'm sure you all understand, that I'm generalizing here. I'm sure there are exceptions. I'm not talking about every intellectual in the West, and I'm just trying to generalize about it. And because of that, the first question everybody has to ask is who is an intellectual? That's not an easy question to answer. Or at least if you write an article on intellectuals, at least you have to understand yourself what you mean by intellectuals. Maybe what you mean others don't agree with, it doesn't matter, but at least you have to say to yourself, what is a mustaqaf? Who is an intellectual? What I decided, and again, this is not the only way of addressing the question, who is an intellectual, that I'm looking at two groups of what I can call intellectuals. People who are within the institutions, within mainly academic institutions. I'm not sure all the academics are intellectuals, and of course I'm not sure all the intellectuals are academics. But in that kind of structure that the academia provides, at least the society regards the people there as intellectuals. So it's not an objective definition, it's how they are perceived, how they are looked at. The second group is those who are emerging out of activism, who don't necessarily have a home in the academia, but they have a stage to talk, a platform, maybe in the internet, maybe in a demonstration, maybe in Wrshat al-Amal of Mad al-Karmel, it doesn't matter, but they come out of politics or activism, they don't have institutional affiliation, and yet probably when we think about Antonio Gramsci's definition of organic intellectuals, there are far more organic intellectuals than many academics in the academic institution. And I'm talking particularly on the West. I think every different culture and society should be looked at differently. I would say that even before the 7th of October, but particularly after the 7th of October, some of the knowledge that intellectuals produce for the audience in the West, some of that was produced by organic intellectuals in the activist world. Sometimes much more than in the academic world. Sometimes there was a fruitful dialogue between the knowledge produced by the intellectuals who are part of the activist movement and the intellectuals or the academics in the institution. the most important place, by the way, in the West, this is particular for the West, where knowledge of activists and knowledge of academics came together is in a new field of inquiry. I don't know how many of you are aware, but there's a new field of inquiry in the West called Palestine Studies. You can do an MA in Palestine Studies in many places. You can even do a doctorate in Palestine Studies.
This is after the 7th? Or
No, it began before, but it became even more popular, attractive after the 7th of October. To my understanding, today in the West, you have 8 programs of Palestine Studies. So they get a degree. Sometimes it's a degree in politics / Palestine Studies. Sometimes it's a full degree in Palestine Studies. And that's where activism and scholarship are actually meeting in these two ways of producing knowledge. Now, academic intellectuals, who are the focus of this research, have 3 ways in which to influence public discourse or policy from above. And maybe it's also true about intellectuals in the solidarity movement or activism as well. The first one is to appear in the media. And it depends whether you appear in the mainstream media or you appear in the alternative media. I know many of you who are connected to the media in the Arab world or in Palestine and so on are able to appear in what would be called in the Arab world mainstream media. I don't know how much you are aware that it's much more difficult to appear in the mainstream media in the West with critical views on Israel and solidarity with Palestine than it is in the mainstream media in the global South in general and in the Arab world in particular. So there is a difference between the connection between the established academics who can appear on the mainstream media, but they can do it under circumstances that do not allow them to be very critical. So if they want to be critical, if they want to be loyal to their ideas and views, they go to the alternative media. The second way is books. Surprisingly, with all the predictions that people will not read books anymore in the West, and also not only in the West, people still read books. They read books, and books, the wider audience doesn't read academic articles in academic journals. But they do read books, especially if these books are able to popularize academic ideas in a way that is more accessible to a wider audience. And there is a great hunger and thirst by the public for books that are giving a wider context of what's happening in Palestine, especially now that Palestine and Gaza is in the focus after the 7th of October. And we saw a great rise in sales and in popularity, especially of popular books written by academics, in a level that all publishers are saying was never there before. Never there before. The third way is for academics to be invited as consultants or advisors, either to the government, to the security services, to the army, to anyone who makes policy. And there, academics might feel that if they are invited to consult, they have impact on the policy, not just about on the conversation in the society, but on the policy itself. When you look at it analytically, you can see that the only academics that are invited to consult are already known by the establishment to agree with the policy of the establishment. So when MI5, the Secret Service, the Shabak, the British Shabak, Mukhabarat al-Baritaniya, when they did want to have a debate whether to proscribe Hamas as a terrorist organization and later Palestine Action, they invited academics, because they are, by protocol, they have to consult the experts. So they invited only those academics. They already knew, agreed with them, that the only way to define Hamas is a terrorist organization, and the only way to define Palestine Action is as a terrorist organization. So not surprisingly, the policymakers, in this case the heads of the security service and the police in Britain, said, oh, these academics tell us that actually our policy is correct.
So you are saying now that after the 7th of October, the involvement of the academics intellectuals in Europe become more, has been expanded?
No, I think this was before the 7th of October. I'm just saying that it enabled us, the 7th of October, pushed policymakers in the West to take some non-democratic and anti-democratic decision, especially about freedom of speech that is connected to Palestine. The same happened, by the way, after 9/11 for a while. And what they did this time, compared to the past, they are using more and more academic justification.
So they became more involved.
Yeah, they became more involved. In that respect, yes. And, of course, it goes back to my first question. Who is an intellectual? Okay. Now, what is particularly interesting for me in my research on this question is less the academics who write books and are popular. A book is something you can hide behind. You're not always interactive with the people around you. You write the book. If you want, you have an interaction with the people. If you don't want, you say the book has its own life. You can't do it in the media, and you can't do it vis-a-vis the policymakers. You are exposed. And that's where I encountered, this is not my concept, I encountered a concept which I was not aware of that exists in psychology, called moral panic. So it's not something I invented on the road, saying people have moral panic. There is such a thing as moral panic. And moral panic is defined in a moment where your own perception of your moral position is very clear. It doesn't matter whether objectively it is true. What is more is subjective. You say, I am a person who opposes oppression. I am a person who wants the immigrants to be accepted. I want a multicultural society. I believe, I really feel bad whenever I see injustice in terms of human rights and civil rights. I was against the war in Vietnam. I was against apartheid in South Africa. I was against the racism against African Americans in the United States. I have not only a position, I have a record, my own record. I know where I stood and when did I speak out, and so on. And then you take this kind of framework that you have as a person, especially as an intellectual or someone who perceives himself or herself to be intellectual, and then you are forced actually to use the same values when you react to the genocide in Gaza. But you're panicking. Why are you panicking? Because unlike all the positions you took in the past, there's a very high price that you might pay. You might lose your job, you might be suspended, you might be called an anti-Semite, you might be called an Holocaust denier. Remember, I'm talking about the context of the West. It might not work in Brazil or in Malaysia, but we're talking about the West. It works in the West. It's a powerful tool of intimidation. You are paying. It would not be right to come to these so-called intellectuals and say you're not going to pay any price. What do you care? No, you are going to pay price. And then you come with the opposite concept of moral courage. Yes, you need moral courage. And moral courage is not translated in getting a lot of blessing from the Palestinians, or saying, oh great, you are with us. No, moral courage is that you might pay a price and you're willing to pay the price. Now, you know, academic courage is an oxymoron. Most academics are not very courageous people. Again, I'm generalizing. Everybody here is not included, okay? Or everybody is listening. But academics are not known for their courage. They are within a system that is very much geared towards promotions. You need to move in the ladder. Eventually, you hope to get some sort of tenure, some sort of a fixed position, and that creates a lot of problems for you if you are seen as embarrassing your institution, or if the government is not happy with what you are doing. Maybe in brackets, we should remind ourselves, I know you all are aware of this, that in the 21st century, universities became two different contradictory institutions. On the one hand, it's a business that has a management run by technocrats who have no academic qualifications, but have and many of them come from the business world. They were former CEOs in multinational corporations. I'm talking about the West. Multinational corporation. They are the ones who run the university, they run the budget. They are more interested in research money than in the production of knowledge. And more in the 21st century, unlike the previous century, they have now a very powerful position in deciding the careers of academics. In the past, it wasn't like this. Technocrats in the US and the UK, for instance, which are two systems I'm very familiar with, were not allowed to be involved in the process of promotion of someone from lecturer to professor or for tenure. Nowadays, they are present in all the committees. So part of the decision of whether you are good enough academic to be granted a higher position or to have tenure or to be thrown out of the system is not just decided by your peers, by experts in your field who say whether you are good academic or not. They're also decided by the technocrats. Are you fitting the business plan of the university? And that, of course, explains why moral courage is not encouraged by the system itself. It's self-defeating. You are coming to a point where it's very difficult to do this. My main criticism in Germany was that I was not talking about the academics in vulnerable position. I was talking to the full professors, those who had nothing to worry about their position. So there the explanation of the management and its impact was not relevant because they were not in a danger of losing their position, and yet they reacted as if there was a high price to be paid. And I will come back to this, explain why I think they did it, especially in the German context. Now, or maybe I'll do it now, you know, because I think it connects very well. In Germany in particular, unlike in the rest of the West, as I said, the phenomenon was more obvious because these more permanent, more celebrated kind of academics were displaying the same kind of moral panic. It was a bit different in the English-speaking world, by the way. I think there, not immediately, unfortunately, sometimes too late, but academics with established position, especially in the United States, finally understood that they have a role to play because of their relative security. And I can show you statistically how more and more of them were finally making clear positions and support. They lagged behind the students in the encampment, there's no doubt. But they caught up. They caught up in the United States. I think they caught up, and also in England, and also in Scandinavia and other countries where at first it was the students who really showed the genuine solidarity without fear. the academics came along, but not in Germany. Not in Germany. And Germany is, I have to say, I hope you understand it, it's important to look at Germany, not just because of the complex history it has with Israel, Zionism, and Palestine, because Germany is the most important country in the EU. And the EU is the most important trade partner of Israel, one of the most important military partner of Israel. So any change in German policy has impact on the EU as a whole and has an impact on the Western perception of the reality here and so on. So Germany is important to analyze, not just because of that complex history that connects the Holocaust with Zionism. And it is very strange to see these intellectuals who had very clear position, either on Ukraine recently or in the past, on colonialism, apartheid, and so on, not willing to reflect the same principles that inform them on these occasions when it comes to Israel and Palestine. I think that what is more even kind of interesting, it's the best word I can use for this, is how far the management of the universities in Germany went to deal with the possibility that maybe not all the German intellectuals would do what is expected of them. I saw directives from university managements in Germany to their staff, to the faculty, not to use the concept of context when talking about the 7th of October. Don't use the word context. If you use the word context, either in your classes or in your seminars or in the media, the context, it means that you are challenging the Israeli narrative of what happened on the 7th of October. So instead of saying you should be loyal to the Israeli narrative of what happened on the 7th of October, which was too much to say, they didn't want to, they said the word context can indicate that you are misunderstanding what happened on the 7th of October, and unintentionally you are slipping towards anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. And this of course, shows you how deep is this betrayal of the basic ideas of freedom of expression. I'm not talking about morality anymore.
Not
Just
morality, but academic logic.
academic logic as well, of course, it goes together here. Now, why is it in Germany? The obvious explanation that people give, well, you know, they have a guilt complex because of the Holocaust. I don't say anything new here. I'm sure you are aware. The Holocaust memory is being manipulated, used in Germany to silence criticism on Israel, and that is not something new. It didn't happen on the 7th of October. This was always what Israel was always hoping for from German academics, politicians, and journalists. You will always be with us, and if not, we'll remind you what you did during the Holocaust. But that is true. I looked at it more focusedly. This is true about a certain generation of academics. I went to the younger generation who are, and to be honest, they are less troubled by the Holocaust. Not in the sense that they deny it, but they say, you know, this is not us.
Less guilty feeling.
Yeah, we don't. They are much less informed by the guilt. So what are they informed by? And I think this is something that deserves even more analysis. But I realized, talking with a lot of German intellectuals and friends, that the Nazis succeeded in destroying, we forget it, they eliminated a whole intellectual tabaka, a whole intellectual class. They really just eliminated them to the last, not just a few. It was a rare moment in history where a total intellectual kind of group disappeared. Some of them saved themselves and moved to the United States. And you look at Germany after 1945, and you think about a student in the West who says, I want to work with someone famous, someone big in his or her field. So you had Habermas, and that's it. You didn't have. You went, there were German scholars you were very interested in working with, but they went to the United States, they went to Britain, they went to France. There is a poverty of intellectualism in Germany that contributes to moral panic in my mind. And this goes together with the level of politicians, which is not just a problem in Germany, but in the West. The younger generation of politicians are very self-centered. They see politics as a job, not as a vocation. And that, you know, this together creates a certain, I would say even cynicism. Some social scientists call it militant ignorance. There's such a term, but I don't want to use it. To me, it's too complex. But I think it's a kind of, it's an intentional ignorance of anything that could undermine your political career or your academic career. And if you compare academic to political career of young German academics, they have the same pattern. They're using even the same methods. You know, they might go to a public relation office to make sure that they are well prepared for the next stage, even if they're not politicians. Now, moral courage also can exist in Germany, but those academics will not be invited, of course, to the mainstream media in Germany. They will not be in a discussion with the German political elite. You will find them in the alternative media. The good news is that their numbers, and this is the terrible dialectical connection we have between the continued genocide in Gaza and the recruitment of more people to the camp, I would call it to the camp of the moral courage. 1 year of genocide was not enough. 2 years has an impact. It's terrible to say it because you don't want a third year so that the number of courageous intellectuals would increase. But realistically, we have to admit, this is the connection. The connection is not that someone talked with them and told them, you know, where is your moral constitution? No. The pictures are too difficult to ignore. The reality is too difficult to ignore. And of course, this is sometimes too late and too little, of course. But it's a process that we have to acknowledge because it might have a positive impact, not in stopping the genocide tomorrow, but if you want to have a more positive, optimistic view on the future, on the long term, you have to remember that this is not just a conversation by those I call members of the camp of moral courage. It's not just condemning the genocide. Far more important, and this relates to the conversation we had at the beginning of the Wrshat al-Amal, which elects in all the articles of even the so-called anti-Zionist Jews in Israel, or so-called anti-Zionists that we read, unlike these people, they are now connecting the genocide to the essence of Zionism. And they have to have more moral courage than before because they don't declare themselves only as pro-Palestinian. They don't declare themselves only as member of the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. Part of their shop window, what they show to the world, is anti-Zionism. Now, in Germany, in France, and there is now a movement in America to do the same, anti-Zionism is going to be defined legally as anti-Semitism, as racism, by law. So you could be brought to trial. And some people, in some German states, it's already the case. Some people were brought to justice because they said we're anti-Zionists. So the moral courage, if you want, demands more in a way now. If it's not, and that comes to Haneen's remark, academically and logically, they understand this is the only way you can go about it. You cannot separate the genocide from an analysis of Zionism in an historical perspective since 1882 and in a moral perspective. What we know this ideology, despite all the supposedly different versions of Zionism from left to right. And academics have a very important role here because they have the time to look at it. They can unlearn, as one group calls itself in Germany. They call themselves unlearning Zionism because they were brought up on this idea that you don't touch Zionism as an academic topic. So now they're touching Zionism as an academic topic. And settler colonialism sounds to them as the most reasonable, logical, not ideological, but logical paradigm for analyzing not only Zionism, but also the genocide in Gaza. And in the West in general, this is even more prevalent. This is much more prevalent in all disciplines. That's where I draw my optimism from. Because I know that people think academics don't have that much influence on society and politics, but I think they do. I think they do, sometimes indirectly. They are the ones who really determine what will be in the textbooks in schools. They are the ones who determine what will appear in the documentaries of the mainstream media. The alternative media is very much influenced by their work. It's not a knowledge production that gets lost. It becomes useful. So this knowledge production is moving only in one trajectory. Only in one trajectory. And that is, you know, if you think about this, the people who were part of the PLO Research Center in Beirut in 1965, it's they are resurrecting the writing of the 39, I think there were 39 scholars who worked in Beirut between 1965 and 1972, who wrote, unfortunately at the time, mainly in Arabic, not in English. So people in the West were not aware of what they produced. But it's like, it's coming to roost, as they say in English. It's now becoming a result, and it's okay. Academics cannot rely on what other academics wrote in 1965. They have to do their own research. You can't expect them to say, oh, someone wrote it, Yusuf Sayer wrote it in, or Ibrahim Abulur wrote it in 65, I accept it as without any research of my own. No, they had to do their own research. They have to do their own research, and they are doing it. And that's the importance of Palestine studies, because it gives them a home as young scholars to do it, not just as a more matured one. Now, of course, towards the end, I want to say that we are, this movement on the one hand, not so much in Germany, but at least in other parts in the West, of intellectuals who are part of the academic system. The two things that are happening to them. One, the much more intensive interaction with those I call the intellectuals of activism. The closer connection between them. What Edward Said called the re-emergence of the activist scholar, or the scholar activist, depends where you look. The legitimization for activist scholarship. This is a very positive development, and it is growing. But like everything that happens that challenges the power of an Israeli lobby, the powers of imperialist interest, the power of capitalist interest, if you become visible and if you become more influential, there is also a reaction. There's also a pushback. And of course, the rise of populism in the United States, in other parts of the West, part of that populism include a wish to bring back the academics into the fold, to make them loyal again to politics from above, and not to go wild with these ideas, especially nowadays the focus is on Israel and Palestine. Now this pressure, again, would demand different levels of what I call moral courage or will increase the levels of moral panic. Depends what you are talking about. And I will finish by saying that what was interesting, we had a meeting, I don't know if you are following the establishment of, and this will be my last sentences, the establishment of Centers for Palestine Studies in the Western academia. The last contribution is in Berkeley, headed by Usama Makdisi, succeeded in recruiting the necessary money, and I think he opened, about a year ago. I was honored to be one of the inaugurators, he opened a new Center for Palestine Studies at Berkeley, and he invited most of us, directors of centers from the West, and we were there all together. And we had an interesting debate between us. We had the people from, for instance, the Palestine Center in Columbia University, who saying it's not very wise to use the centers as part of political activism. It's okay for members of the centers to be involved politically, but we in Columbia try, for instance, the center not to be activists. I presented the opposite model. I said, I created the first ever academic center in Western University. Mine was the first one in Exeter, 2007. I said, my model is exactly the opposite. I don't want my members to be active. I mean, that's up to them. I'm not going to tell a colleague of mine, go and demonstrate. If you want, go and demonstrate. I want the center to be a center of activism and scholarship, and to claim that there's no contradiction between good scholarship and committed activism. And I proved it to my university, I proved it. Our PhD students, who are both activists and scholars, are the best in the university. And the university says it. But by objective criteria of how you decide whether a PhD is a good or bad work. So my university is convinced that actually activism enhances scholarship. In the United States, and that's very interesting, and I also found it in some universities in the West Bank, I won't name them, there is a sense that if people are too activist, it undermines the objectivity of the scholarship, or the level of the professionalism. I don't believe in it. Not in a case like Palestine. Not in a case like Palestine. Maybe, I don't know, about something else, but I'm not interested in something else. I'm interested in Palestine.
But what do you mean that the center itself must be?
It means that the activities of the centers, its workshops, its website, its declaration, are not purely academic. That's what I mean. Clear. So another center would say, we are having a conference on the history of Palestine. My center would say, we have a seminar on the history of Palestine in order to understand why Israel is committing genocide. It's two different messages. Of course, people who would go to the first one would learn a lot, and it will help them to understand. But there's a different position. And one of the reasons, and with this, my last sentence, we were so annoyed in my own university, but I know it was true about the West in general. The managements, I remember I said the universities are both management and community of scholars. The university management, when it came to the Ukraine, said Ukraine is not a political issue. And they published, as universities, they published condemnation of Russia. So when we asked them to publish condemnation of Israel, they said, no, that's political. And that contradiction, this hypocrisy, is really something that helped us to see what we want to do, and hopefully we'll do more in the future. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
شكرا إيلان.
العافية. يعني هذا السؤال دائما بين السياسي والأكاديمي والأخلاقي والوطني، هذا السؤال يعني احنا بمدى الكرمل وبتخيل كل مراكز الأبحاث الفلسطينية مشتبكة معه، يمكن والنقدية كمان. يعني احنا بنحكي الفلسطينيين لأنه قاعدين تحت حالة الاستعمار، بس كل المراكز النقدية هذا السؤال المفروض يكون مطروح. واحنا يعني بنحكي دائما انه طبعا احنا منحازين، اكيد احنا عندنا مشروع عدالي عندنا مشروع تحرر طبعا منحازين له بنحكي، وهذا لا يلغي انه احنا في ابحاثنا وفي دراساتنا وفي اللحظه التحليليه احنا بنكون منهجيين موضوعيين بمنهجياتنا، ونسال الاسئله اللي بتقلقنا وبنحاول ندرسها بس بدون ما نلغي انحيازنا ابدا. فشكرا كثير ايلان. بدنا نفتح اذا في نقاش، ملاحظات، اسئله، تعقيب طبعا كمان بتقدروا. نبدا بالاستاذ علي مواسي وبعدين علي عشان التسجيل بينفع تمسك
You need a mic.
عشان التسجيل.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear you and to learn new things about what you do. I want to ask about two things. First of all, when we talk about global academia, mostly we think about the West, as you say. But what we can learn from experiences around the world, especially with to make I don't know, kind of collaborations with the centers or scholars for Asia and in Africa to make the change inside this system, even in the Western and the Israeli universities. This is the first question. The second question, now we can see how the government policies around the world in the West challenge the students, the centers who care about the Palestinian question with the facts. What you think it could affect this centers, and what we should do as students, as scholars, as people who work in the field.
Thank you.
جاوب واحد
واحد
تمام بالاول
خير الكلام مكرر.
تمام.
Well, of course, I was asked to talk about the Western intellectuals, so yes. But you're right. There are, first of all, there are new centers for Palestine studies in the global South. 3 in South America, 1 in Malaysia, 1 in Korea, 1 in Japan, 1 in South Africa. It's growing, and I'm now in connection with people in Kenya to do the same. But you're right, there is a difference, and there needs to be collaboration for 2 reasons. As one good Brazilian friend told me, when you speak about Palestine in Brazil, you're not walking on eggs. You don't have to worry that people would say to you, what about the Holocaust? What about anti-Semitism in Brazil? It's not part of the story. And we should de-Westernize ourselves in deciding where is the power to change. Is the power to change really still in the West, or is the power to change outside the West? Now, that's the preliminary question you have to ask yourself. Now, if the answer is yes, I think power shifted. Power to change reality, I'm talking on the ground, which means we go to our friends in Malaysia and Indonesia and say, your government is not doing enough. We go to our friends in Africa and say, you're not going enough. You know, it's like you have much more power to influence our reality than you realize. We want to recruit the academics for that kind of message. Now, most of our partners are still people who feel victimized by the global South, not just by the West. Indigenous people in Latin America, Muslim minority in Thailand. You need to study well the composition and the demographics before you act, because even there, the gap between political elites and the people themselves are worth looking at in order to build a proper network. But you're absolutely right. This is something that has to be, and we're already doing it.
I think it's not just different in the activism itself. It's also an epistemological output.
Absolutely. It's like the famous atlases that puts Latin America at the center and the West on the margins. Yes, it's a different perspective but it's really de-Europeanized and de-Westernized knowledge. It's decolonizing knowledge, but it's also decolonizes activism in that respect. So I agree with you. As for your second question, you know, it depends really what, especially within academia, what you think the purpose of such centers are. I have a different perception than some of my colleagues. My perception is that I need a center to provide safe space for postgraduate students and young scholars to write freely on Palestine. I don't need money for that. But I do need a little bit for scholarship because unfortunately doctorates cost a lot, but I don't need beyond that. I mean, I need scholarship. The other centers say, no, we need to do our own independent research, and that requires resources from governments, and that they will be affected by it. My solution for it is very clear in my mind, but I'm not saying everybody should agree to this. I think we should separate between creating independent research centers on Palestine outside the academia and continue to encourage Palestine studies within the academia as an educational project. Yeah, in parallel.
بعدين غادة، بعدين حنين، بعدين فراس. تمام. تفضلي غادة.
Thank you. Is this working?
We hope so.
بما انه مع الوقت انا بقترح يعني جاوب السؤال. تمام منيح هيك
You
عشان
want
ما
me? What?
تنساش.
You want to take
To
some?
answer, yeah, no, I want because we still have time. You can answer each question.
Okay.
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 Come on.
Okay, I have two questions, but my first question relates to the question before. And you sort of tackled some aspects of it right now at the end. Like there were some centers for Palestine, you know, research or a safe haven. We have the Palestine Center in Washington, D.C. You have the Institute for Palestine Studies in Washington, D.C. in Georgetown. You have PARC, the Palestinian American Research Center, established 1998. But I remember, at least the U.S. that I'm familiar with in the 2000, it wasn't, you cannot, at that time, I don't think it was feasible even to talk about Palestine. So there is a reason why 2007, I think, I'm asking more than, you know, commenting, that it might have been, the situation might have made it easier to establish such Palestine centers in 2007, and because I know of other attempts to, like in Toronto, I'm sure you know the folks there who have been trying to have some Palestine centers or studies and they have failed. So my question now after October 7th, do you think it's worse, it's harder or it's easier? And I'm sure it's harder. What's your advice? Because there are lots of places that I'm familiar with in the West who wants to have also Palestine studies. What should they do? That's my first question. My second question, because I'm sort of familiar with American, you know, and the West academia, and I studied there, and I'm always in touch with them. So I sort of know some of the things that you raised. So my question is specific about the Israeli left academics who were very like non-Zionists, and when when October 7th hit, they were very the morality question between being a Jew and supporting Palestine. It became a really hard question, and I know that some of them have changed their positions, and some of their students have stopped, you know, being, you know, they didn't want them to be their advisors, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. Can you talk more about this sense? I'm sure you've known about it in the academia and with the Israeli Jew academics. Thank you.
Yeah. For the first question, maybe 2007 was easier. It was, in my case, much more circumstantial because I was thrown out of the University of Haifa and I was looking for a job in the world and I got a lot of offers. And I had to decide where do I want to work. And I said, I'll put a condition. I'm willing to be in your university if you allow me to create a center for Palestine studies. The only university that said yes was Exeter. So that's why I created this center. But it's worth looking into what you're asking. And by the way, it was not that easy. They first said, okay, call it the Center for Israel and Palestine Studies. And I said, no, I don't want so many centers for Israel studies. I want to call it Center for Palestine Studies. Then they said, call it Center for Palestinian Studies. And I said, no, it's just, I'm not going to research and study the Palestinians. I'm studying the country, which is called Palestine. That for the last 70 years when I was there is Israel, part of it is Israel, but it all includes, because I have to decide academically, what do I call the country, not the state. So that was part of the negotiation. As for other places, before I go to the Jewish issue, I think it really depends now on the general political atmosphere in a specific Western country. I'll give you an example. The last center that I know has been inaugurated is in Lisbon, in Portugal. In Portugal, there's a new Center for Palestine Study in the University of Lisbon. The reason is that the Portuguese political milieu has changed in the last 2 years. So the university management is not deciding by itself on politics. It follows the politics from above. The politics from above by the current political system in Portugal is it's okay to show institutional solidarity with the Palestinians. A similar attempt in Denmark failed because the right wing is in power in Denmark, is very pro-Israeli, and they said, no way, not only that they are not allowing the Center for Palestine Studies, they want to close some of the departments for Middle Eastern history because they say Middle Eastern history in Denmark equates Palestine studies actually. It's not true, by the way, but they say it's a disguise. They call it the Middle East history, but they're actually doing Palestine. So it really depends, and I think that much depends of how many of the most stubborn European countries would finally understand what goes on here, and then their academics would follow. Unfortunately, it's not the academic that influence the politicians, it's the politicians that influence the academics. Your last question, yes, I think this is something both for the non-Zionist intellectuals in Israel and those especially in the United States. And I think people like myself are a bit responsible for this in the 1990s, not on purpose, but we did a mistake. In the 1990s, we created this idea of being a post-Zionist. Post-Zionist is like you are in the middle between anti-Zionism and liberal Zionism, and when it's not comfortable, you go to the liberal Zionist department, or you stay on the bridge, or you cross the bridge and you go to the building of anti-Zionism. Like old post, that's true about postmodernism, post-structuralism. Post has created this unfortunate idea that you can be liminal in academic terms. Okay. Yeah, but we all were, not all, I was there as well. It was very mesmerizing, it was very attractive. I think we all have a hangover, post hangover. And that is true about this kind of position. Now, what happened was a very interesting departure. And it was not because of the reaction of the students. I mean, the reaction of the students was a symptom of the problem, but not the problem itself. The reaction was in two ways, which is very interesting. One reaction said, okay, it's time to take strategic decisions on an individual level and collective level. And the strategic decision is not only to say my Judaism has nothing to do with Zionism. I have a way of defining what it means to be an American Jew, and I don't need any connection to Israel for that, for the first time in the history of American Jews. But it also, because I was complicit when I had the previous identity, I want to be active in the pro-Palestinian solidarity movement. This is Jews, how they call Jews, Jewish Voice for Peace. Yeah. The other reaction was the other way around. This is going too far. I'm very uncomfortable. This is J Street. I'm very uncomfortable with what Israel is doing. And sometimes I would join demonstrations against Israel, but I would stop when people would force me to analyze the connection between Judaism and Zionism. I'm not dealing with this. And it's also a generational thing. And therefore, I think it's in the many, many developments that makes me optimistic, not for tomorrow, in the long term. One of these developments, not the only one of this development is the continued disassociation of young Jews from Zionism outside of Israel. It's an important development. It's not the most important one. I don't think Palestinians have to deal with it. It's not your problem. As Muhammad al-Kurd says correctly, it's not your problem, it's our problem. We had the first anti-Zionist Jewish Congress in Vienna. 400 people attended. A very important Congress. Yeah. So, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
شكرا. بدي اطلب منك غاده انت قريبه بس بعدين بدي اطلب من حنين وفراس يقربوا لانه اللي على الفيسبوك مش عم بيسمعوا اللي بيسالوا. خذي المايك احكي. ايوه خلي معكم الميكروفون بعدين حصير.
Thank you, Mr. Bابيه. My question is about the moral panic. Do you think that the intellectual has a conflict inside between what is moral and not moral, and he needs a push to go toward courage, or it is a type of surrender? Okay, this is the situation, and I won't say my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's. I always wondered whether I can think about the formula of how to help them to deal with this disease, if you want.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's a matter of a comfort zone. It's a comfort zone. I think what will change if the comfort zone will not be comfortable anymore. I'll give you two examples. One is the fact that we have now new parties, or relatively new parties in Europe, especially in Europe, not big ones, but for the first time in the history of modern Palestine, they have, like the Houthis, they have in their platform a point about Palestine. You know, so you have a party who says, I'm from social justice, I want to nationalize the railway, I want to give early pension to workers and so on. Point number 7, as a party we are committed for the liberation of Palestine. This is Jeremy Corbyn's new party in Britain, a new left party in Spain. Now these, I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but what I mean is that it's entering politics as an issue that has electoral value. We saw it a little bit in the debate within the Democratic Party in the United States before the election of Trump. When the Progressive Democrats said to Kamala Harris, one of the reasons we don't like you is your position on Palestine, which was never heard in a Democratic convention before. Palestine was never discussed in a Democratic convention, especially not in the moment when you had to decide who is the candidate for presidency. I think our value as historians is to point to these issues that even if they disappear, they are important because they will reappear.
Yes.
It's difficult to see it now in Trump and Democratic Party, but it will reappear. It will reappear. And Mamdani in New York is one indication that it's reappearing. It is reappearing. National politics, local politics in the West are now connected to Palestine. Not always, but you know, I was in France between the first round and the second round. The first round, never mind what happened afterwards. It's haram. In the first round, the left was unable to recruit people. I was brought, among other people, because I have a great following in France. I was brought it was really ridiculous in a way. I was brought to talk to North African immigrants in the poor neighborhoods in Brazil, in Paris, to convince them that voting for the left is good for Palestine. And I'm not saying I did it myself, but we were a group of people, quite a large group of people, who did this. And they did, because the problem in the first round was that the immigrants or the second generation of immigrants, did not vote. Although they identified with the left, they didn't vote. They went out and voted. And every analysis of France French politics will tell you they did it because Palestine became an issue on the one hand, and that the right wing turned Israel into the issue, or anti-Semitism, which is Israel, to the issue. So I think, you know, this can also happen in the academy.
So you are saying, Ilan, first of all, thank you very much. You are saying that we are in a transformative moment in which one of the aspects of this moment that politics became more involved in academy, and academy became more involved in politics, whether justifying politics or calling for more decolonization politics. Can you say anything? And don't hesitate feeling that you may insult us as a Palestinians. Can you say anything about the intellectual activism of the Palestinians in 48? Because you talked about academy should be more activistic. We should act as in a more activistic way. So what can you say about 48, the Palestinians in the 48 and their role as intellectuals and intellectual activists, and what you can say about anti-Zionist Israelis? Those who are anti-Zionist, you can trust them supporting decolonization, calling genocide, etc., connecting between genocide and settler colonialism, but about their activism, intellectual activism.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Shall we send Muhammad outside?
Muhammad Mada will be from the good guys.
Yeah. Despite her question is not relevant to your lecture.
I know.
But
So you mean I can
No.
decide not to answer? That's what it
But
means.
بس كمان قبل
But I
كان
will. But I'm willing to say something.
بس خلينا بكونوا مع ذلك خليه يجاوب.
No, Mada is not included. Okay. No, I would try, although as Muhammad said, this is not the topic, but of course it troubles me. I don't have a Jewish reference group when I'm here. My reference group. No, I'm not a
سؤال حنين انه شو مثقف الناس
لا أنا intellectual activism تبع 48 anti Zionist Israelis وخلص.
I'm not going to be abusive. I mean, I'm willing. I mean, as I say, my reference group is the Palestinian intellectuals and academics. I have few colleagues who are still Jewish intellectuals, but most of my reference group, talking academically, is outside, not inside, when it comes to non-Palestinian academics. So yes, it bothers me as well. So, like any other system, I think that academics or intellectuals here are very much influenced by the political system. Not just the Israeli political system, but also the political system that the 48 Arabs built themselves. What Azmi used to call in a very long ago article, the strategic decision of 48 Arabs to use a certain strategy that fits the reality of being citizens in a Jewish state, which is not the same strategy of Palestinians under occupation or Palestinians in the refugee camp. I don't know if you remember, for me it was a very formative article, very helpful one. And I think even Azmi himself would agree that the strategic decision then was taken in different political circumstances. If we accept Lorenzo Verasini's message to us that the 48 Arabs are not facing only a settler colonial paradigm, but they're facing a genocidal regime, which was his main message. Actually, what he wanted to say to us, and he won't take it upon himself, he's an Australian academic, he said, but do you realize, especially, I think it was not only for 48 Arabs, it's true to people in the West Bank as well, you know? Yeah. Are you as Palestinian intellectuals, academics, activists, are ready to digest the fact that you are now facing a genocidal regime and not just a settler colonial regime? Because maybe settler colonial regime allowed you to create the Palestinian Authority. Maybe it allowed you as 48 Arabs to play the game in the Israeli Knesset.
To be critical in the
Yeah.
academia, we
Yeah.
say whatever we want.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop
But
settler colonialism.
absolutely. So what I'm saying here is that I'm not going to be in a position, Hanin, I'm not going to tell people what to think, but I do think that Lorenzo reflected what many of us were feeling, that both the 48 Arabs, and now I talked about 48 Arab intellectuals, and the 48 Arab politicians don't have much time left to avoid a very crucial strategic decision. The idea that you can play both in the political field of Israel and the political field in Palestine and somehow navigate is not going to be possible for too long. So the question is, do you want to wait for the moment that it would be clear enough, or you want to think already now, especially as intellectuals, because you can experiment with it without taking crucial decision that affect your population. But shouldn't you really now discuss this? In that respect, I think, I don't know who decided, it was Muhammad or Nadim, bringing Lorenzo's article was really good in that respect. Because at first I listened and I said, it doesn't really connect to what we are doing here. But the more I thought about it yesterday, I thought, really, this is Lorenzo's way. I know him for so many years. It was his way to say, are you really discussing the important things now? And he's modest. He said, I'm an Australian. I won't tell you what is the important. But are you? Are you really? And doesn't the settler colonial paradigm is a problem for you because of that maybe you're not discussing fully. You are discussing a lot, which is important, but maybe you are leaving out something. So in that respect, I think yes, I think something has to be done. But listen, we are all. This is not an abstract proposition. We all live here. We know what can it bring with it. What does it bring to our own society? What does it bring to our individual beings, and so on? This is a very dangerous, on the one hand, and necessary journey. But Palestinians are not unknown to face such moments in their history. You are much more experienced than many others in the world of getting to these junctures. But yeah, I do think so. The big question is, how do we make it, and that goes to where he's gone, Ali's comment. How do we make it an international concern? How do we make it an international concern so that we are not alone? Because alone is difficult. How do we make it a pan-Arab concern? How we make it a pan-Islamic concern? And then how do we make it a global concern? Because it has to have these networks.
Actually, it's the opposite. It's an international concern. we don't know how to be.
Well, maybe we don't know how to exhaust it.
Yeah, now it's the opposite. It's really the opposite.
It's like you go to, and there will be another demonstration in the 11th of October. I remember the first 1 million people demonstration in London. I don't know if any one of you ever participated in a demonstration of 1 million people. It's an experience for life. It's not that you know it's 1 million, but you feel it's 1 million. You know it's 1 million. You know, because you are in an ocean of people, and you feel very strong. You really feel very strong when it's and we were talking in the demonstration, and we say, how do the Palestinians can exploit this unprecedented solidarity, and why don't they? Why don't they know how to use this amazing fundamental change in public opinion in the world to their advantage. Are we analyzing correctly why this unprecedented international support for Palestine doesn't have an impact on the ground? This is not just because the Palestinians are not supporting. There are other reasons as well. What else? Yep.
فراس تفضل. في حدا ورا فراس يسأل؟ فراس تفضل.
Thank you, Professor. You talked about how universities are becoming two institutions, the business side and the academic research side.
علي شوي في
I was wondering how do you explain the existence of Palestinian centers in those universities that are critical of Israel or that are activist centers, while there are managements that are against criticism of Israel or that are suppressing the even student protests, and also so there's this contradiction, and then to what extent does the management interfere in those critical research outputs of your centers?
Good question. You know, because in scientific terms, I know all the centers, so I don't need a sample. I can do a research on all of them. You know, I don't. Unfortunately, 13, 14 in the world. So I can examine.
Can you write us a paper?
Yes, I can. We can do that.
You have a paper
About Palestine studies. Yes, the journal of.
with Tariq
In the Harvard, in the Harvard Journal. But I can do something. And I know the circumstances of the establishment of each center. And it was not always a very revolutionary act against the management. Sometimes it was circumstantial. I'll give you an example. Colombia, after the death of Edward Said, at least had to acknowledge that what he did to Colombia, almost nobody else did. Some people, singled out Columbia University because Edward Said was the August, the big name, and they went along with this idea that one of the best way to commemorate his legacies would be a center for Palestine studies. So the management always thinks that if they allow it, they also can control it. So I'll come to your second question in a minute. In other places, I told you the circumstances of my case. In SOAS, for instance, this was at the time when the old management was replaced by a new one that was not really fully understood what was going on, So it's not always a strategy that you can copy. That you can copy from one center to the other. You have to understand the reality, the circumstances. The one in São Paulo, for instance, had to wait to a change of the rector. Because the rector of São Paulo University in Brazil, until 2 years ago, was a Christian Zionist. There was no way. With the fall of Bolsonaro and the rise of Lula, also in Brazil, rectors are very political nominations. So he was, and then it was possible to create the first ever Center for Palestine Studies in São Paulo University in Brazil. As for your second question, yes, also in my university, they began to regret their permission, especially after the 7th of October because of the students, because of the encampments. They could somehow tolerate, workshops of academics that the pro-Israeli lobby didn't like and would pressure the university. For instance, when we did the big conference in Exeter, Settler Colonialism in Palestine, the Prime Minister's office, at the time was David Cameron, pressured the university that we will abolish the conference because it's anti-Semitic. The university said, no, it's an academic conference, and they did not cave in. Whereas, for instance, the University of Southampton cancelled because of this pressure. But what the students did to us, which is good, the encampments did for us, they escalated They escalated everything we did. There was no more, maybe, you know, in English we call it sailing near the wind. You know, we went into the storm. We didn't avoid the storm because of them. We didn't do it ourselves. And everywhere the encampments demanded of us as academics to teach in the encampments as well as in the classroom. And that was, even for my university, which is relatively open-minded, was too much. Was too much. This is abusing. I think it was not just about the pro-Israeli lobby. It was challenging the very structure of what is a university. They found it very difficult to accept that students would decide what to teach, how to teach, and where to teach, exactly. So the pressure was very, and you had to navigate. I mean, I and my co-director, Nadia, we spent hours in the university management trying to postpone inviting the police to expel the encampments, to dismantle the encampments. We reached all kinds of funny compromises of language and so on. It was very, very annoying. Led me to the conclusion that I want to create another center outside of the university in England, to be totally free to do what I want on Palestine. Not only me and my colleagues want to do on Palestine. That there is a limit for what you can do, even if you are in a relatively open-minded academic institution.
Yes, I have.
Sorry? Research output, this is England. They're still not interfering with research output. I mean, it's not like when I was in the University of Haifa, the presidents and the rectors were sometimes people who were in the Labour Party and so on. This will never happen in England. They would call me and say, "We read your article. It's not a good article. It's not a very good article. We think you should write another article." And we will. And I said, "Yeah, and we can help you. We'll find you a place to, but correct the mistakes you made." Mistake was, no, this is not in England. They know that nobody would say to me, "You cannot write this and this is enough." In fact, I will give you a very quick example. On the 8th of October, I wrote, and everybody wrote things on the 8th of October, which maybe not all of it was okay because we were all under. As historians of all people, we should have waited. I mean, who is an historian who writes on an event a day after? But who could be silent after such an event, right? So I wrote an article in which I said that I distinguish between the Hamas actions against the Israeli military and the Hamas actions in the civilian population. And I think the actions against the military is very brave and something like that. Immediately, the Israeli lobby, I was called to the police station. There was a complaint about you. You are supporting terrorism under in Exeter. Under the Anti-Terrorist Act, you showed direct support for terrorism. So I went to the university and I said, "What do you suggest?" I decided to recruit them. I didn't want to face myself. So the legal advisor of the university said to me, "No, you're known as an expert on Palestinian history. You write about Palestinian resistance as an academic, you're not a member of the Hamas. You are an academic expert, quite known in Britain. It makes sense that you have an opinion about what happened. This is your academic, of course it was not just mine, but that's your academic opinion, and you are entitled as an academic. Yeah, it's mandate. You have a mandate, and in my case, it doesn't always work for everyone. They accepted it. So, but yeah, once you declare you're an activist scholar, you yourself create opportunities for them to say, "Wait a minute, this is not your scholarship," because you yourself say that you are an activist, and so on. So, yeah.
Yes, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you think, at the macro level, do you think that the 7th of October re-questioned the ethics of the capitalist system in the West? For example, in the USA, a lot of citizens said, "Why we pay tax and then these taxes will fund Israel?" In Germany, the university are going toward commercial institution. So do you think that this affected the question of this capitalist system? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the 7th of October, and it's, again, here I do want to be cautious as an historian to evaluate its significance. Intuitively, I feel it's Zilzal al-Ard. I think it is an earthquake. It is a fundamental event that in time we will understand much better its importance and the impact.
You mean the day or the genocide?
No, both. I don't think you can separate it. I think it's, for me, it's one event. Because you also have to ask about the price paid by the people of Gaza when you evaluate the significance. You cannot avoid it. You cannot just look at it as an achievement without talking about it. But I do think, I do think that it's the epicenter, it's the center of very basic questions on international level, not just about economics. International justice, international economic, and international policy. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of a great economist from Columbia University, Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs says rightly, you cannot separate international economics from international politics, and you cannot separate international politics from international justice. They all have to work together, or they don't work together. If they don't work together, if the global economic system is not just, then there's no cooperation against the ecological danger. And if you don't work against the ecological danger, you don't get the international reaction you need for the genocide in Gaza. You cannot separate this issue. I think that's what we learned, what we didn't learn before the 7th of October. Many of us did not realize how much it is connected. It is connected. So what let's call it the Gaza affair, in order to include everything in it, you know. First of all, raised, I'll just give very short examples. One, international legal system. Never before did people question the legitimacy of the ICJ and the ICC, given that despite their willingness to use a certain language, people, especially in the global south, have many doubts about their universalism. That's why you have now the Gaza Tribune that Richard Falk and other jurists have created. So people are looking for alternative. It questioned the credibility, which I don't know how it was in the global south, but definitely in the West. The mainstream media was very credible. You mentioned the word BBC in Britain. People thought one thing we can trust is that they are honest, they are objective, they are professional. Very few people feel about it because of Gaza, not because of the Ukraine. Yeah. So the confidence in what traditionally were the reliable sources of information has changed because of Gaza, and now come to economics. I think in terms of economics was that the problem for anyone who was involved with solidarity with the Palestinians was that you always knew that you are winning the moral argument. But that the moral argument doesn't matter if there are economic interests that make powerful factors or actors to support Israel, right? If they can buy arms, they can buy high-tech, pharmaceutical knowledge, scientific knowledge, and so on. So even if you're winning the moral argument more and more, you're not winning the material better. I think what Gaza did, and again, this is a tentative conclusion. It's 2 years. I think what it did, for the first time, the project of Israel, the project of Zionism, is questioned from a material point of view. Is it an asset or is it a liability? In cynical economic terms, not the United States paid $3 billion every year until 2023. In the last 2 years, it paid $20 billion for Israel. I feel they will have to pay not $3 billion every year if they want to sustain the military effort, the new ideas of controlling the Middle East, to bomb Qatar, Sana'a, where they want. This costs money, a lot of money. So you begin to hear it, for example, in the Republican Party, that it's a financial liability for the United States. So yeah, I do think that this would also prove to be one of the impacts. And I come back to my last sentence. I do believe that long-term future will be determined by processes that right now seem to have nothing in common. Jews not being Zionists, economics not being good for Israel, international solidarity, implosion of the Israeli Jewish society from within. They all seem not to be connected. But I know from history that these processes have a tendency to become a transformative at a point. And what is interesting, and I checked it historically, in most cases, not in all cases, they suddenly accelerate. Suddenly it's very quick. The beginning of the fall is very slow. The end of the fall is dramatic. Every place you look, South Vietnam, South Africa, the Eastern Bloc regimes, the general regimes in Argentina, in Chile, everywhere you look, even before, in China and so on, it's a slow process that suddenly accelerates. And when it accelerates, you understand even better, I think, the significance of what happened in the 7th of October and after.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
حد بحب يعقب او يسال اي سؤال؟ تمام. شكرا كثير، شكرا إيلان.
شكرا لكم.
تعبانين؟